Rome is an affront to God. Rome is strangling my people and my country, the whole earth.
When the dust settled and the chariots fell silent, what remained weren't cheers, but echoes. Ben-Hur gave us vengeance, redemption, spectacle, but in its shadows lived quieter figures, forgotten by history, but never by consequence. A mother buried alive in stone and shame. A Roman prefect who passed the sentence, then washed his hands. A king on a throne of fear. A prophet who believed in miracles and waited his whole life to see one. This is not the story of glory. This is what came after. The second half of Ben-Hur wasn't told in triumph. It was written in scars, silences, and the eyes of those who watched history move and dared not speak. Ben-Hur, Eternal Shadows, Part 2. The aftermath. The witnesses. The ones the Empire couldn't silence completely. Martha Scott, Miriam. She was the mother who disappeared, not in death, but in silence. In Ben-Hur, Miriam doesn't command the screen. She haunts it. Imprisoned, broken, cast aside by empire and forgotten by her own son, she is the embodiment of quiet devastation. And in that role, Martha Scott delivered a performance that didn't beg for pity. It whispered of strength forged in grief. Born in Jamesport, Missouri, in 1912, Martha Ellen Scott didn't arrive in Hollywood with flash. She came with craft. Her film debut in Our Town, 1940, reprising her Broadway role, earned her an Oscar nomination. But even with such an auspicious start, the studios never quite knew what to do with her. She wasn't a box office commodity. She was something rarer, a woman who could carry tragedy without theatrics, pain without melodrama. In Ben-Hur, as Miriam, she is the ghost of Judah's past. The mother who suffers in silence while her children are torn from her arms. Leprosy strips her dignity. Captivity takes her name. But never once does she crumble into hysteria. Scott plays her not as a victim, but as a pillar worn down by time. You can feel her love through the walls of the prison, through the veil she wears to hide her shame. When the moment of recognition comes, when Judah discovers she is still alive, it's not just a reunion. It's a reckoning. Off-screen, Martha Scott was every bit the professional. She worked steadily for decades, from film to stage to television. Her talent was undeniable, yet she remained on the margins of the Hollywood machine, respected but rarely revered. She found work where she could, choosing characters that had depth, even when the roles weren't designed to shine. And in her later years, she even found a kind of cult legacy, appearing as the commanding Sister Beatrice in Airport 1975, proving that gravitas never ages. She passed away in 2003 at the age of 90, long after the world had forgotten how quietly brilliant she had been. But in Ben-Hur, she remains eternal. A mother not rescued by plot, but redeemed by faith. A woman who never raised her voice, but left behind an echo strong enough to break stone. Martha Scott didn't need to be remembered by Hollywood. She is remembered by those who watched her and never forgot how it felt. Frank Thring, Pontius Pilate. He wore imperial robes with a kind of theatrical disdain, draped in silk and sarcasm. As Pontius Pilate in Ben-Hur, Frank Thring was not just a Roman governor. He was the embodiment of cold authority wrapped in polished cruelty. His voice didn't rise. It cut. His eyes didn't blink. They judged. And when he spoke of washing his hands, you believed it wasn't just blood he was rinsing off. It was centuries of guilt. Born in Melbourne, Australia, in 1926, Frank Thring came from cinematic royalty. His father, F.W. Thring, was a pioneer of Australian theatre and film, the man who invented the precursor to the modern clapperboard. But young Frank didn't inherit his father's fame easily. He began in radio, crafting sound effects and voices, before moving into stage and screen, where his presence became impossible to ignore. Thring was never cast for softness. He was tall, cold-eyed, and unmistakably theatrical. And that was exactly what set him apart. His commanding performances in Shakespearean tragedies earned him a place on the London stage beside legends like Laurence Olivier. His chilling role in Titus Andronicus left such an impression that it led directly to his casting in The Vikings, 1958, and then Ben-Hur, 1959. His portrayal of Pilate wasn't fire, it was ice. He made silence feel like a threat. He didn't need to shout. He simply watched, with the calm cruelty of someone who held lives in his hands and didn't care what slipped through his fingers. He later portrayed King Herod in King of Kings, 1961, proving that few actors could make decadence and damnation look so regal. Away from the camera, Thring kept his private life out of the spotlight. He lived with elegance and mystery, equal parts showman and enigma. In an era that demanded masks, he wore his with mastery. Frank Thring died of cancer in 1994 in his hometown of Melbourne. His screen time in Ben-Hur was limited, but every word he delivered still lingers, quietly damning, exquisitely measured. Some actors play villains. Thring became one, and made you love the chill he left behind. George Relf, Tiberius Caesar. In Ben-Hur, George Relf appears as Tiberius Caesar, aged, composed, and veiled in the ominous calm of empire. He doesn't roar or rage. He rules with a nod, a glance, a presence that feels heavier than iron. It was his final film, and fittingly, he played an emperor, aloof from the world below, yet haunted by its weight. Born in 1888 in Cullercoats, a quiet coastal town in northern England, George Walton Relf had one of the longest journeys in British theatre. He took the stage before the First World War, debuted in Hamlet in 1909, then traded Shakespeare for a soldier's uniform. The war shattered bodies and timelines, and Relf was no exception. Wounded in combat, he returned to the stage in 1918, not broken, but deepened. He played Horatio opposite John Barrymore's Hamlet in 1925, and critics praised him for a performance that radiated loyalty and quiet tragedy. Relf was never prolific on screen. He didn't chase fame. He was a man of theater, measured and meticulous. Yet in the twilight of his career, the camera finally caught what the stage had long known. His power wasn't in what he did, but in what he withheld. As Tiberius, he barely speaks. He doesn't need to. You feel the weight of history in his stillness, the burden of an empire in his silence. Though his screen appearances were few, Relf left behind more than performances. He raised a son, Michael Relf, who would become a notable director and producer in his own right. In 1959, the same year Ben-Hur was released, George Relf was honored as a commander of the British Empire, one final salute to a lifetime spent crafting moments on stage. He passed away less than a year later, in 1960, at age 72. Quietly, without spectacle, as if the final curtain had closed and he, true to form, simply stepped back into the shadows. But for anyone who's seen Ben-Hur, his face, lined by time, crowned by authority, remains. The last emperor, the last word, the final stillness before a world erupts into chaos. Finlay Curry, Balthazar/narrator. He was the voice that led us into the desert, the eyes that first saw the star. In Ben-Hur, Finlay Curry wasn't just Balthazar, he was the soul of prophecy. While others marched for Rome or plotted revenge, he moved slowly, humbly, with the weight of knowing something none of them could see. He was the first to believe, the first to hope, and the last to ask for anything in return. Finlay Curry was already 80 when Ben-Hur reached the screen. By then, he had lived more than most could in 2 lifetimes. Born in Edinburgh in 1878, he started as a church organist and choir leader. His stage debut came at age 20, but it would be 34 more years before he ever stepped in front of a camera. He performed in London, New York, Australia, singing, cracking jokes, and later commanding Shakespearean tragedy with the gravitas of a weathered prophet. He was half of a double act with his wife Maud, and they toured the world together before he ever became a name in cinema. When the film world finally came calling, Curry didn't play heroes. He played memory. In Great Expectations, 1946, his Magwitch was terrifying and tragic. In Ben-Hur, his Balthazar was weary and luminous. One of the 3 magi who witnessed the birth of Christ, now searching for a second miracle before his time ran out. His performance wasn't theatrical. It was reverent. When he looked toward the cross, he wasn't acting. He was remembering. Behind the camera, Curry had already endured deep loss. While Ben-Hur was still filming, his wife Maud died, ending a marriage that had lasted over half a century. But Curry kept working. He believed in motion. "I shall work until I drop," he once said. More people die of boredom these days than anything else. He was nearly blind in one eye. He kept his hair long for biblical roles. He made coin dealing a quiet second profession. And when he wasn't acting, he was studying. Always curious, always engaged, always alive. He passed away in 1968 at the age of 90. Not with fanfare, but with dignity. The kind of ending Balthazar might have understood. Quiet, certain, filled with faith. Finlay Curry didn't need to shout to be heard. He simply looked up and saw the star before anyone else. Terrence Longdan, Drusus. He didn't shout. He didn't command. He obeyed. In Ben-Hur, Drusus is the kind of Roman who stands just behind the orders, watchful, precise, never questioning. Played by Terrence Longdan, he became the cold echo of empire. Not its violence, but its indifference. In his silence, you could hear the machinery of power turning. Longdan didn't need a leading role to make an impression. With his sharp features, measured voice, and disciplined presence, he often found himself cast as the reliable officer, the gentleman soldier, or, in this case, the dutiful servant of Rome. But beneath that crisp exterior was an actor who had lived many lives. Born in 1922 in Newark-on-Trent, he almost became a civil servant before the world erupted into war. He flew for the Fleet Air Arm during World War II, providing air cover for convoys in the Atlantic. But somewhere between the cockpit and the calm, he discovered a different calling: acting. After the war, he trained at RADA, and the theater became his battlefield. Shakespeare was his ammunition. From Cassio to Prince Hal, Longdan wore the language of tragedy like armor. In Ben-Hur, his Drusus serves as a quiet enforcer, the man beside the throne, never daring to look above it. He doesn't speak often, but when he does, it's with a calm precision that chills more than any scream. You believe this is a man who has learned to survive by never asking why, only when and to whom. Longdan's career stretched far beyond the sands of Judea. He charmed audiences in the early Carry On films, starred in the TV series Gary Halliday, and later graced stages alongside legends like John Gielgud and Peter Cushing. But he never clung to fame. He chose theater over stardom, complexity over convenience. When offered a long-term contract with Carry On, he walked away, not out of arrogance, but because he refused to be boxed in. He passed away in 2011 at the age of 88. Quietly, without the blaze of headlines. But for those who remember Ben-Hur, his Drusus stands as a reminder: not all villains shout. Some wear armor, some follow orders, and some disappear into history without ever asking if they were on the right side. Terrence Longdan didn't need to take the spotlight. He understood the power of the man just behind it. Morel, Sextus. In Ben-Hur, Sextus is a man caught in the eye of a storm, an official who watches the world shift around him, unable or unwilling to alter its course. Played by Morel, Sextus wasn't a tyrant. He was something more dangerous, a bureaucrat with a conscience, paralyzed by order. Where Messala was fire and Arius was honor, Sextus was the face of resignation, power without conviction. Morel gave that role a quiet intensity that didn't need grand speeches. He was an actor of restraint, of precision. Born Cecil Andre Mesritz in London in 1909, Morel came from the stage, trained in the traditions of Shakespeare and the Old Vic. His voice was commanding, his gaze calculating, but there was always a flicker of something deeper behind his eyes: doubt, intellect, a man measuring the weight of every word before he dared speak it. He had already made his mark in The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957, where the line between obedience and madness blurred. In Ben-Hur, that line becomes even finer. As Sextus, he watches Judah Ben-Hur return not as a prisoner, but as a Roman-adopted noble, and you can feel the shift in his demeanor. He is a man who understands systems are fragile, that Rome is not eternal, even if no one dares admit it. His role may be brief, but Morel makes it linger. You remember his caution. You remember the hesitation that history always forgets. Off camera, Morel was respected in every corner of British performance, stage, television, film. He served in World War II with the Royal Welsh Fusiliers before returning to a career that would take him from Hammer horror films to Doctor Who. He was offered the role of Professor Quatermass not once, but 3 separate times, turning it down each time with the kind of deliberation that marked his life. He did not act for convenience. He acted for meaning. Married to acclaimed actress Joan Greenwood, Morel kept his private life as disciplined as his performances. He died in 1978 of lung cancer, leaving behind a son, a legacy of quiet excellence, and a body of work that critics often overlooked, until they tried to find someone else who could do what he did and couldn't. In Ben-Hur, Sextus doesn't shout. He doesn't fight. He merely hesitates, just long enough for destiny to pass him by. And in that hesitation, André Morel gave us a portrait of every man who ever stood at the edge of history and chose not to step forward. They didn't lead armies. They didn't win races. But they were there when judgment was passed, when prayers were whispered, when the world turned its back and called it order. Miriam, the mother erased by disease and shame. Pilate, the ruler who chose silence over justice. Tiberius, the emperor whose presence loomed like a fading shadow. And Balthazar, the prophet who saw light and watched it crucified. They weren't the heroes. They were the witnesses, the ones history blurred into the background, even as they held the weight of the story. Long after the chariots stopped rolling and the gold statues gathered dust, what remains are these performances, quiet, restrained, and achingly human. Ben-Hur was remembered for its scale, but these were the moments that made it eternal. If their stories moved you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more voices that still echo through the silence.